So I guess this is the fifth now group coaching call. Um, so this should be as most people that started on week one from the very beginning of this launch should be most people's fourth week on this new setup, and it should be for everybody else that's been rolling with me for a while. Then it's just kind of another week, but a little bit different than it has been in the past. So, as we're wrapping up that fourth week, most of you have noticed that either some of your patterns are starting to repeat again, or you would notice that on this coming week that your patterns would seem to repeat again we were talking about some of the reps and sets, even if it's not an exact match from what it was several weeks ago, then you'll notice that the general pattern will begin repeating, and that's because most of the time training is organized in 3 week waves. But sometimes the waves can be as short as 2 weeks. Sometimes the waves can be as long as 4 weeks. Sometimes they can be even longer than that if we have something that we can run linearly and progress it for say 6 weeks. If there's something that there's enough potential left in somebody's tank to do that without having a point where you stall, then a linear progression for 6 weeks might be something that you see as well. But nonetheless, most of you should be seeing some of your patterns start to repeat. And for you ladies specifically, then yours is talking about looking at the patterns. You two probably have noticed that some of your patterns and the way that things are waved has changed a little bit because we have some transitions too. So it may not
Hmm.
every 3 weeks right now because we have a little pivot week thrown in here and there. We have a little transitional week thrown in here and there. And then some of the other stuff, we are going to be able to run a little bit longer than 3 weeks linearly before we drop back and cycle back through it. So, why do we run through these waves? In short, it's so that progress doesn't slow. So, if we rotate through what our different stimuli are in a not totally linear pattern, but in a cyclical pattern, then we're able to stay focused on what we're trying to focus on without going too far away from that, while also exposing our body to new stimuli on a continued basis. And when we uh, talk about how far we can run something linearly, because I've mentioned that a couple of times, a lot of times what we're really talking about is how far away from somebody's potential somebody is, and how much potential development do they have left. So if somebody has a lot of potential left, say they think about somebody that just started training, then you probably really don't need to devote all the mental energy even to making somebody that's a complete beginner cycle through 3 week waves because they're likely going to progress so fast on so many other things that they don't need to drop back on that third week. And they probably won't be accumulating as much fatigue either. Right. So there's a lot of considerations with how far we run something linearly, but the biggest one is just how much potential do you have left in the tank and how well are you set up to capitalize on being able to not only develop the raw characteristics for that potential, but also be able to display that potential. So going back to that like beginner example, if somebody is truly learning to do this stuff for the first time, as their mechanical efficiency improves, as all these other things improve, there's no reason that they shouldn't keep getting better really, really fast just because of the skill component getting better. And then when you're looking at the way the skill component impacts the physiological component, as they're getting better at performing that movement, they're going to be almost auto regulating how much intensity they're able to maintain in their training, regardless of what I really do with manipulating percentages and stuff like that. Um, if I just sent somebody that's a true beginner in and this wouldn't be optimal, but just for the sake of the conversation and understanding the concept, if I was to send a true beginner in and just tell them to do a 5 rep max every week for 6 weeks, it wouldn't be the best way to do it. But you could probably assume that unless that person is just being really, really reckless and not executing the lift properly, that they could probably improve that maybe not every single week of the whole 6 weeks, but most weeks. And by the end, they would have made, statistically speaking, a lot of progress. Whereas if I was to take somebody that's already very experienced and throw them into the same thing, they would probably run themselves into the ground 3 or 4 weeks into hitting the same 5 rep max over and over again. So that's for a couple different reasons. One, as you get better at the lift, you're able to produce more mechanical tension with the same amount of relative intensity, meaning that uh, uh, meaning that a lot of times I don't do a whole lot of sets anymore that are true working sets because I'm good enough at the movement that if I try really, really hard on a movement or two, then that's about all that the muscles and everything else can handle. Um, as your mechanical efficiency goes up, the amount of work that you have to do goes down for the most part. And then the other thing is just how far can you run things linearly before you start to stall? So, for other factors, for other physiological factors. So, if you're already adjusted to a stimuli and you're having it introduced again, but you've done it before, your body's going to recognize that and you're not going to need quite as long to get good at it again. So, if we're running, say, box squats, then if you're running that for a beginner as a secondary movement, you may run it for 6 weeks or 12 weeks or something like that. Um, and that may be in the program for 6 to 12 weeks straight. If we're talking about somebody that's a bit more advanced, it may be in there for 3 to 6 weeks. And if we're talking about somebody that's really advanced, then that they may change their variation every week or every other week for assistance stuff. They may the waves may look even different, so they may be letting that volume and intensity auto regulate a little bit with that. But um, regardless, the reason that we set the waves up is to manage fatigue and just to keep you from um, slowing down in your progress. So if we can think of things like a spiral, then usually we can keep things moving faster. We can keep a faster rate of change from one week to the other in terms of how much progress that you're making. And a little bit of that, like I was touching on, comes down to keeping the stimuli more novel, stuff like that. Although the research has shown that just novel stimuli for the sake of novel stimuli is not as important as it used to be, or as we used to think it was. What the what the real thing there is they've discovered that when you vary things, you just end up covering a lot of bases that otherwise it would have been hard for you mentally to have accounted for covering all of those bases. Um, so really, if you do cover all those bases and you do so in a way that allows you to more meaningfully manipulate the volume and the intensity, then that's probably going to be better most of the time. So um, I went a little bit ranty there. Is that making sense to you
It
guys?
makes good sense. It does make good sense. I like those rants because I can follow your rants sometimes, Josh.
Cool.
So
Well,
not always, but most times I can. But that does make sense.
cool. So when you're setting up waves for yourself, or when you're just looking back at your training and trying to identify those waves, you'll note, like I said, you'll notice that they're either set up on 2, 3, or 4 week increments for most people. Um, and when we look at that in people's training, that doesn't always have to be the same for every movement either. And so that's something that's important too. That if you're focusing on something, say you're focusing on the race that's coming up, then you may have, especially if there's a characteristic to do with that, that you can progress a little bit more linearly, then if you're able to progress it linearly, then it'll probably have a faster rate of change if you don't need to change it up. faster rate of change. So, you know, you're pretty good all around because we've had a lot of time to put things together as we've went. Um, but some of the stuff, like we've kept the skip to lateral box step over in almost the whole time, right?
Yep.
And that's maybe not as easy of an example because it's not quite as objective with like it's not 100 pounds on the bar for X number of reps, you know. Um, but the way that it's been sequenced in there, that wouldn't truly be a linear progression either. It would be an undulating progression because we went up and down with it a good bit, right?
Yep.
But as far as something to improve the skill on, right, that's been in there for a long time for that purpose. Because we were able to more meaningfully manipulate volume and intensity on that by continuing to change how much of that we were doing, how long we were doing it, what we were pairing it with. And so what we paired it with and how long we were doing it, that was giving us the ability to change the intensity. And then how many times we did it cumulatively through that time would change the volume, right?
Yeah, and it's
Uh,
helped a lot. I think the technique then the skill has helped tremendously. Same with the rower, the erg, and the bike. We've had a lot of different variations of that that has made that it's given us time to figure out a groove on that
mhm.
and settling into the longevity of it. Yeah, I mean, it's only a
Yeah,
3 minute thing, but still doing it for 10 minutes or 12 minutes has helped to find that rhythm and pace to be more efficient than I think when we go complete balls out from the very beginning.
right,
It's finding that slow, easy groove that gets us there quicker and faster. If
right.
that,
Because when we go from the metabolic adaptation side, then going all out is going to stimulate more adaptation than if we're just kind of going through it, right?
yep.
But then it comes down to the skill of like how are you going to go through this that long too? Like how do you like you said kind of pace yourself a little bit for it? Um, so the more we can make things when we talk about lifts and stuff, I say like a loaded technique drill a lot of times.
Yep.
But it's the same thing with anything, right? When you talk about any sport specific drill, any sport specific exercise, series, or movement, then what you're really doing is you're taking whatever part of that thing you need to get better at and you're breaking it down to some sort of component that you can actually track and progress because it's
Mhm.
really really hard to track things and progress things if you well it's really hard to progress things if you can't track them, right? And there's
Yep.
different ways to track things. There's subjective ways, there's objective ways. Usually the more objective we can make it, the better. Woody? Oh,
That's
That's my
my
dog
dog.
barking.
oh,
Sorry, beat
no,
myself back.
you're good. So yeah, the more objective we can make things, usually the better. But as long as we can, we have to be able to track it to be able to progress it, right? You can think about that with anything. If you're trying to sell a house and you don't know how much the fucking house costs, you're in a big. I mean, that's question one, right?
Right.
Uh,
Exactly.
yeah. So as these as everybody notices, their waves changing up, and they'll notice some movements change up. They'll notice some other movements stay the same. Um, I guess based off of my rant today, you can kind of ascertain. Most people will be able to ascertain how advanced I think they are on something now too. Although there is looping back around from saying beginners might stick on this forever, intermediates change it up a little bit more, and it's kind of a continuum there. But where it becomes paradoxical is at the very end when you go past like very advanced to like the top of the top, then ideally, if you've made it, well, not ideally, if you've made it to the top of the top on whatever it is, you probably did so by addressing all of that stuff in a well-rounded way. So by the time you get to the top, it gets really, really simple again. So, you know, I know a lot of people that by the time they are hitting world record lifts, they're maybe only doing 3 or 4 sets of assistance work per exercise or per workout. And then everything else is just focused on the main stuff. Um, because they're already so good at it that they don't really have to do that much other stuff. And they've already built everything they need to around that, so that they don't need to do a whole lot of other stuff to activate everything they need to when they're doing it to get everything done. Because if you get really good at any movement, every movement becomes a total body movement too, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my little rant on waves changing up. Again, that's a little different for y'all. Um, but
Yeah, but we've seen all that in the past. You know, we've seen how our
yeah, yeah,
things.
yeah. And I know y'all know all that. Sometimes it's helpful to have the rant more in a lecture form instead of me saying a couple things about it while we're running in between sets places.
Yeah.
And I
It
know,
makes sense to know
yeah,
that why behind everything.
well, and especially with y'all planning to take some clients on at some point, I wanted to try to make sure that some of this fills some of the gaps in connecting the big picture that certifications I don't feel like do. I feel like a lot of certifications are good at giving people some of the tools, but they don't really ever give them. They don't really ever give them. Shit, I'm not a handyman. What's that called? You used to do construction. What's that called when somebody gives you the instructions?
Blueprint, blueprint,
Blueprint?
schematic.
Yeah. So it's like they went through all the vocab. It's basically a lot of the certifications, even when they discuss some of the practical application in it, the way they discuss the practical application, in my opinion, mostly really just kind of drives home the vocab. I really don't think most of them do a great job of connecting the big picture for people. Um, so if you can put together any certification program with just generally having some good experience as an athlete and generally seeing the big picture, then you're good to go. And a lot of times the certifications they go really far one way or really far the other in terms of how they focus on things. So like some of them that like really push block periodization. I know ISSA used to be big like this. Um, but I think they actually went through a phase where they kind of didn't focus on this quite as much either. Um, but a lot of them that'll focus on like block periodization, then people kind of get caught up in I'm going to go from this phase to this phase to this phase, and I'm just going to cycle through these phases forever. And I don't know, it kind of feels like people kind of get to like sleepwalking through it like that.
Yeah.
And not as bad as when people don't see a a need for different phases in training and everything. It's just like I'm just going to make a workout for what I'm doing next. Um, so I feel like people get really lost in the forest. Can't see the forest for the trees with that.
Yeah, we talked about that before. I think that's
Yeah,
what a lot of people wind up doing.
yeah,
Yeah,
yep,
they get burnt out.
Um,
We've talked to many people and they're burnt out, they're stuck because they're doing the same cycle all the time.
yeah, and and I guess kind of the thing that again becomes like a little bit paradoxical, and like when you're looking at all this stuff, it gets to a point where a lot of people are just like, well, shit, just keep it simple. And so then, and that is true. There's no reason to overcomplicate things. Um, but generally speaking, like as long as you're setting your training up in different phases and you're being mindful about when you go in and out of those phases. When I say people sleepwalk through it, like typically block periodization is set up where you have like a hypertrophy phase a strength phase, and then either a power or competition prep phase. And then you would come out of that and go back into a hypertrophy phase, unless you need something else. And then if you're talking about like true beginners, you would also start with like a general preparation and stability phase, um, which you could go back into at any point that you needed to as well. Um, but I feel like a lot of people will just end up getting like locked into like I know people that get hurt part of the way through, something, and they'll be like, well, I'm in the middle of a hypertrophy block. I'm still going to finish out the hypertrophy block or whatever. And it's like, well, just, I mean, who cares? Like, just call it a day on that and go do something different now, you know?
Yep.
So that's what I mean with that. Kind of like, it's the same thing as people that are like, they write out a program and then the program becomes the Bible, right? So it's like, I've got this 6 week program and we'll do this for the next 6 weeks. And they wake up one day and their shoulders hurt, their knees hurt, and they're like, I'm gonna take some ibuprofen and go bowl through this 6 week program instead of thinking maybe I should rework this bit. So the big thing with all of this stuff is it's just tools to know how to navigate. And so the block periodization shouldn't be something that people feel like they get locked into. It should be like a map so that whenever they get to the end of a strength phase, if it went really well, then they're like, okay, well, I'm going to go into this power phase and now I got really strong. So I'm going to learn how to use this for more athletic things. I'm going to learn how to produce this force really, really fast. And then that's going to help me maintain that strength as I go back through this next hypertrophy phase too. And it all kind of connects together, so you can see that. And then you can get, if you get into the power phase and you're like, oh shit, I tweaked my ankle, walking on the snow, then you shouldn't, shouldn't keep doing jumps and shit like that for the next couple weeks. Or, even if
Right.
you change up the movements and maybe you're doing kettlebell swings so it doesn't hurt your ankle or whatever. It's like, well, who cares? Like, you're not going to be able to make this all transfer. It would have been a much better use of your time to just say, all right, I'm going to go back into a hypertrophy phase for a little bit, or I'm going to go back around and do a stability thing or whatever. So it's really just kind of like, it's just a map to navigate. Like everything just becomes a bigger flow chart. The more tools that you have and the more prongs that you can add to the flow chart, it just becomes an algorithm of, if this happens, then you do this next. And the more tools that you have, the more elaborate the algorithm gets. And so, it might start off with, if I need to get bigger, I'm going to do a hypertrophy phase. If I need to get stronger, I'm going to do a strength phase. If I need to get faster, I'm going to do a power phase. And if I need to get better at doing movements, I'm going to do a movement prep and stability phase, and that's pretty basic, right? But it doesn't really, I mean, that covers, saying it like that covers all the bases, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you come into specific, cases. And so then now maybe we come into, okay, we're in a strength phase. Everything's going good in the strength phase overall. There's no reason to go entirely out of a strength phase. But Gina's shoulder's rising up on bench. So if Gina's shoulder rises up on bench, then we're going to try to fix it. And so how are we going to try to fix it? We're going to, maybe we don't back all the way out of a strength phase. Maybe we got a powerlifting meet coming up, or maybe we just don't want to get weak. But, maybe we throw in some variations that are going to make that, make her focus on staying tight. Maybe we throw in some technique drills, you know, uh, but if we were talking about, a complete beginner, then we might abandon a strength phase if, she was hitting 5 rep maxes and then 3 rep maxes and her technique wasn't getting any better as we're ramping things down. We're probably not going to keep ramping it down and go for a 1 rep max right now. you know, we would probably be like, all right, we'll ramp things back up and get a little bit better at it and work back down. So, um, and then that also comes down to individual things with the lifter too. So if you notice that somebody is really, really good at focusing for a rep or two, then that might actually be, you might actually do things a little bit differently. Because then at that point, you're prioritizing tailoring things to the actual athlete. Um, and you always are balancing physiology and psychology, right?
Mhm.
So, and a lot of times you'll find out working with people that the psychology part matters as much or more than the physiology part, which was always a really hard tool or pill for me to swallow as a nerd who was like, when if I read the study, it was almost like a powerful enough placebo for me to just read the study and be like, all right, this is going to happen. And then I would go do that and I'd be, extra charged up for that to happen. Um, but when you work with people, you come to find out that the power of suggestion and the power of expectation is really, really powerful. And so a lot of times, you know, you can even do this with yourself a little bit. I'm sure that there's been a time that you've both talked yourself into being able to do something. Um, so sometimes just a little nudge um, of encouragement, even if you have to do it to yourself, when you're saying you can't do something, just that little nudge sometimes can be the thing. Um,
Mhm.
or even, with it doesn't have to be like, to actually do it, but being able to approach something with the right mindset makes a huge difference too. So
Everything.
yeah, and so if you notice that somebody needs that little psychological nudge, or if you just notice that maybe they need to have a couple steps to build up to that themselves mentally. Sometimes your changes to people training are more based off of letting them mentally build up to something than it is physically build up to something.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, an example is us last week on that the overhead presses. We thought the bar was a certain weight,
Yeah.
and we kicked ass at 12 when we
Or
thought it was.
60, and we thought we was at 60 pounds, we
Like
thought we were 75.
when G went to do the 75, it was all in her head. She
Yeah.
struggled getting that up. Same with
Yeah.
me. But this week, yesterday, it was fine
Yeah.
because we knew that we were mentally like, okay, we know what this bar weight is now.
Yeah.
And we went into it knowing that. And it was much better than last week. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, it makes you
it's
feel
all,
bad when you grab onto a weight that you think is easy and it feels heavy. Then
Yeah.
even if you adjust and you're like, oh shit, and now you know how much it is and you're calculating things correctly, you still have that mental of, oh shit, that felt heavy just a minute ago. It's kind of
yeah,
like walk in for, a heavy squat day and somebody's like, man, you look sick. Are you feeling all right? Like, it don't matter if you were feeling like you were on top of the world. Now you're gonna be
yeah,
like, do I look like I don't feel good? Like, what the fuck's wrong with me?
Yeah.
So
yeah, yeah.
It's true. It's true. And I think I remember you've done that with us before. Sometimes if we're struggling on something and you have been able to see that we've gotten in our head about it, and you either let us stay at that same weight to kill it on the last set or whatever. But I have noticed in the past that you've read that in us before. Like if we mentally get off on something, you don't want us to die there. You know what I mean? So you
yeah,
let us get something better. So we
yeah,
don't so it don't fuck us up for everything else, because we'll stay there because that's how we are.
right. Well, and everything is momentum based, right? And that's everything in life, in my opinion, is
Yep.
momentum based. And so if you feel that's actually one of the reasons it's important not to miss lifts in training all the time too, is because it doesn't matter all the lifts that you made. It matters what kind of habit you're setting for yourself. You know, um, I really, really try hard not to miss squats. There was a period of time where, well, I've missed very few squats, but there was a period of time where it was 5 or 6 years that I never missed a rep on a squat set. And a lot of that came down to really realistically planning it. But what the end result was that whenever I got under something to squat it, it wasn't even a possibility in my head that I wouldn't stand back up with it. And there's been squats that maybe I missed it because like I got close and I was like, ah, shit, they're probably not gonna stand up with that if I go lower. Um, and there's been times that I got out of position or something happened or whatever. But because of that, um, ingraining that success over and over again, then it gives me the ability to have more success with it because you can just get under it and go, and you don't focus on. You're not there's not the movement apprehension there. You're not scared of it, and if you think about that with anything in life, then that's actually a really important way to approach it. And if you notice that you're being really hesitant with something or you're pulling back and having a guarded, um, just not, going all in on whatever you're doing, then a lot of times it's helpful to circle back and, you know, build up to that task. Maybe if you notice that you're not doing something to the best of your ability because you're scared of it a little bit, you know, there's two schools of thought about it. Some people would say, well, you can't stop doing it. That's going to be how you get over being scared of it. And that might be true. It might just need to be a sink or swim thing, but it also might need to be a go back to the kiddie pool side of the pool so that you don't feel like you're drowning and you're not flailing around. And, don't acknowledge the fact that you're swimming on the kids' side and swimming with the kids, but kick those fucking kids' ass.
Yeah.
And when you're done, and when you're like, I can kick some fucking ass, then go down the pool a little bit more, and now you're with the teenagers and go kick their ass.
Yeah.
And then slide on down the pool to the deep side and go swim with the college swimmer, and then go kick their ass because now you've already decided, all right, well, when I swim against somebody, I'm going to swim faster than them. So, it's the same thing no matter what it is. It's take yourself, it's not putting yourself in a small, it's not making yourself a big fish in a small pond all the time or anything like that. But and there's a whole lot to be said for trial by fire. But at the same time, just sticking with a swimming example, you don't see a lot of Olympic swimmers that their first time swimming, they got tossed in a 12-foot section of the pool. They started, in a way that gave them a lot of confidence and in a way that gave them enough confidence to go into some of those races, even if their first race was when they were 5 or whatever. It gave them the confidence to go into those races and to think, I'm going to go kick some ass instead of thinking like, oh shit, I hope this turns out okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yes. All right. I know Zoom's going to cut us off in about 2 minutes, I believe. So I'm going to quit my rant and let y'all. Is there anything that y'all wanted to ask or add or say?
Yes, but God knows I can't remember what they were. I need to keep a little notebook with me so I can write crap down. Dee, what were we going to ask him?
Where are we going? Oh, I didn't know. Whatever the heck day we do it. When you have us doing the 12-minute row, then I'm in an erg.
That's right.
There is only one erg. So therefore one person is kind of hanging around 9 or 10 minutes.
But we doing something. We're either on the elliptical.
It was the elliptical. We just one was doing the erg. Now,
one
I'm
of
not
you
sure
could do
if that
one
was
and
the
one of you
right
could do the
thing to
other.
do, but for someone to wait not matter.
Yeah, one of you could do one and one of you could do the other, and that way it's only a couple minutes rest.
We did
So it
discuss
don't
that.
matter the
Yeah.
order.
Matter.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't know if it matters the order you have that.
If I want to be really nerdy with it, then hypothetically it does matter the order just a little bit because the rower and the erg are both going to be flywheel type, where it's somewhat kinetic chain, and you can produce as much force as you can. And so that does make it pretty okay to interchange them. But if I was going to be like really theoretical about it, then hypothetically you would get just a little bit better stimulus from putting the compound movement before the single joint for most things. So, well, I mean, they're all multi-joint with this, but you're doing more just straight down with the skier as opposed to pulling to it with the body with the rower. So
Yeah.
the rower
Okay.
would technically be a little bit better first, but I mean, you're still using your whole body. The real difference would be that you're going to end up hitting your abs a little bit harder if you put the ski erg first. So, but it really does.
Okay.
It's that's me being a nerd with it and like really enjoying mincing apart the finer things of it. I think you could probably run a multi-year study, and I bet after 3 years there probably wouldn't be a statistical difference between switching those two.
Okay.
Okay.